Chapter 1: The Golden Era of German Hi-Fi and the Beginning of Change. When people talk about high-end audio today, many immediately think of Japan or China, of Sony, Technics, Pioneer, or new players like Fosi Audio, AIMA, or Corson. But this dominance did not just appear out of nowhere. To understand how Japan and China dethroned Germany as the hi-fi champion, we must first look back at a time when Germany was the undisputed world champion of hi-fi, a global brand called Made in Germany. The post-war era in Germany was not only an economic but also a technological awakening. The country was not just building cars and machinery, it was also critically shaping consumer electronics. Made in Germany was a genuine quality seal back then. It stood for precision, durability, and technical excellence, and in the hi-fi sector, Germany was the leader. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Germany was a hi-fi El Dorado. There was a multitude of brands that were world-famous and defined the sound of the time. The devices were not just good, they were trend-setting. Telefunken, sound from the capital of technology. One of the most famous brands of this era was Telefunken. Founded early in the 20th century, Telefunken was a real heavyweight. In the 50s and 60s, the company built legendary tube radios, amplifiers, and tuners that stood in broadcast stations and living rooms alike. Telefunken was not just a producer, but an innovator. They played a key role in the development of FM radio, UKW Rundfunk. Their V-series amplifiers were world-class studio technology. Their tuners were among the most precise on the market. In the US, England, and Scandinavia, Telefunken devices were seen as the epitome of German engineering. Owning such a device meant owning quality for life. Grundig, the giant from Firth. If Telefunken was the technical innovator, Grundig was the industrial giant. Max Grundig built his company after the war into one of Europe's largest consumer electronics manufacturers. Radios, compact systems, amplifiers, and reel-to-reel tape recorders from Firth stood in millions of living rooms. Grundig had a special talent for making technology accessible to the masses without making it seem cheap. The devices were well-built, reliable, sonically convincing, and they were affordable. Grundig exported globally, especially to Scandinavia, Benelux, and Great Britain. In Germany, the name was almost a synonym for hi-fi. Many people experienced their first genuine musical moments on a Grundig device. Saba, precision from the Black Forest. A true insider tip among connoisseurs was Saba. The company from Villingen stood for mechanical precision, first-class tuners, and a warm, natural sound. The famous Saba tube radios with automatic station search are still cult objects today. Saba may not have been as glamorous as Telefunken or as big as Grundig, but among audiophiles, Saba was a fixture. Devices from the Black Forest were considered finely tuned, musical, and durable. Dual, turntables for the world. When thinking of German hi-fi tradition, Dual is indispensable. In the 60s and 70s, Dual was one of the largest turntable manufacturers in the world. Models like the Dual 1219 or 701 were particularly popular. Technically brilliant, robustly built, and manufactured with typical German precision. Dual turntables were exported to America, Great Britain, and Japan. For many music lovers, their first owned turntable was a Dual. These devices often still run today after over 40 years, as reliably as on the first day. Braun, where design and technology merge. Braun was the first brand to put technology into a new form. Under the design leadership of Dieter Rams, devices were created in the 60s and 70s that wrote design history. The clear lines, the reduction to the essential, the perfect integration of operation and technology, that was revolutionary. But Braun wasn't just beautiful. The amplifiers, receivers, and turntables sounded excellent. Owning Braun in the living room was not just owning a device, it was a statement. Many architects, designers, and culture lovers swore by Braun. Low, classy, precise, advanced. Loewe also played an important role. Originally strong in the television sector, Loewe also released high-quality audio components. Loewe devices were technically up-to-date, often elegantly designed, and considered the luxury class made in Germany. Germany's hi-fi as an export hit. What many forget today is that German hi-fi devices were in demand worldwide. In the US, hi-fi fans raved about Telefunken amplifiers. Dual turntables were popular in Japan, and Grundig stood for reliable technology, Saba for warm sound, and Braun for style. This combination of technology, design, durability, and reputation made Germany a true hi-fi world champion during this time. But while Germany enjoyed its supremacy, something was happening on the other side of the world that would shake this position. In Japan, a new generation of manufacturers began to rise, aggressive, innovative, and highly motivated. Japan understood something that was often overlooked in Germany. The world did not just want quality, it wanted innovation, convenience, and an attractive price. This development was the beginning of a shift that would profoundly shake the German hi-fi landscape. But before Japan called the tune, Germany had truly experienced a golden era with a variety of brands that sound almost mythical today. Chapter 2. Japan takes over, the precision revolution from the Far East. While Germany was still shining in its golden hi-fi era, a technological revolution began quietly but resolutely in Japan. In the 1960s and 70s, a country entered the scene that not only competed with Germany, but eventually became the new world power in hi-fi: the rebuilding of Japan. After the Second World War, Japan was also economically devastated, but the reconstruction proceeded differently there. The Japanese government invested heavily in education, technology, and industrial innovation. Engineers who had previously worked on military projects now turned their knowledge to civilian electronics, and they had a mission. They wanted not only to catch up, but to become better than everyone else. During this time, brands emerged that every audiophile would soon know. Names that are legends today: Sony, Pioneer, Technics, Sansui, Kenwood, Denon, Yamaha, Marantz, Accuphase, Luxman. Precision that shook Germany. What distinguished the Japanese manufacturers was their unique blend of technical precision, mass production, and passion for music. They closely observed what was successful in Germany and the USA, but they did not copy blindly, they optimized. Japanese engineers worked with scientific meticulousness. Every component was measured, every circuit tested for efficiency and low noise. The devices were not just tuned by ear, but developed according to measurable, reproducible values. This was new. While German engineers often designed based on experience and sonic intuition, Japan built on precise measurement technology and industrial repeatability. From the workbench to science, Japan introduced something that barely existed in Europe: a culture of perfection down to the smallest detail. Whether it was a solder joint, a screw, or a faceplate, everything had to be right. No coincidence, no compromise. This philosophy led to devices that were not only technically superior, but also aesthetically perfectly finished. The faceplates were made of solid, glass bead-blasted aluminum. The potentiometers ran smooth as butter, the switches clicked precisely, and the VU meters glowed like jewels in the dark. Hi-fi became an art form in Japan, and the audience loved it. Price and perfection: Japan's unbeatable combination. While German manufacturers like Grundig or Telefunken increasingly struggled with high production costs, Japan had a decisive advantage. They combined highest quality with industrial efficiency. An amplifier from Sansui, Pioneer, or Technics could easily compete with the best German devices, sonically, metrologically, and visually, but was significantly cheaper. This was the point where the balance of power shifted. German manufacturers lost market share, not because their devices were poor, but because Japan produced better, cheaper, and simultaneously more emotionally appealing products. Icons of Japanese hi-fi. Some devices from this era are absolute classics today. Sansui AU-17, one of the most musical integrated amplifiers of its time, or the Technics SU97/SE960, modular studio power amplifiers with studio standard precision. Then there was the Pioneer SA9900, a monster with finest craftsmanship, or the Luxman L507, the start of a high-end series that continues to this day. And let's not forget the Yamaha CA1000 with switchable Class A operation, a world first. These devices proved that Japan could not only build high-end, Japan defined what high-end would mean in the future. Sound philosophy: the difference in the soul. While German devices often sounded neutral and technically correct, Japanese manufacturers developed their own sound philosophy. They sought musicality, emotion. This was not just technology, it was culture. Many Japanese engineers were musicians themselves. They wanted their devices not just to measure well, but to move the listener. This love for sound is still palpable today in brands like Accuphase or Luxman. Thus, the Japanese hi-fi character was born. Warm, flowing, precise, and yet incredibly musical. Export wave and the fall of Germany. From the mid-70s, Japan flooded the world market. Export figures rose rapidly, and suddenly, German living rooms contained Technics, Pioneer, or Sony receivers, not Grundig. Telefunken, Saba, Dual. These brands fought for survival. Some were bought up, others went under. Even traditional houses could barely withstand the price pressure and the speed of innovation from Japan. Within a decade, Germany lost what it had dominated for 3 decades before. The hi-fi Olympus now belonged to Japan. The engineers of the future. But what many did not suspect was that even at this time, Japanese companies were collaborating with Chinese suppliers. Some circuit boards, switches, or transformers were already coming from China or Taiwan. Japan was in the process of creating a network of know-how and production, and this knowledge later flowed directly into the hands of the nation that would take over the stage in the 21st century, China. Chapter 3. China, from copyist to the new high-end. Following Japan, a new epoch began, and once again, it came from Asia. This time from a country that, in the 80s and 90s, hardly anyone associated with high-end electronics, China. What began with perfection in Japan, China continued with a completely new strategy, with speed, openness, and an enormous willingness to learn. First, they copied, then they understood, and finally, they surpassed. The first steps, learning by replication. In the late 1980s and early 90s, hundreds of small electronics companies emerged in China. Many of them produced on behalf of Western or Japanese manufacturers. They built circuit boards, power supplies, casings, or entire chassis. The know-how flowed directly into the hands of Chinese engineers, who were essentially learning by working on the open heart of Western hi-fi technology. Initially, they produced replicas of classic devices, often inspired by German or Japanese circuits. Tube amplifiers based on the Telefunken model, Class A power amplifiers a la Luxman, transistor amps like Pioneer or Sansui. These devices were solid, but not perfect. The components were often cheap, the craftsmanship still somewhat uneven, and sonically, many models seemed a bit restless or unbalanced. But it was precisely from this that China learned faster than any other nation before. The learning curve, precision through observation. Chinese engineers studied the originals meticulously. They dismantled Western and Japanese amplifiers down to the last screw, traced schematics, checked component quality, and most importantly, they understood the concepts behind the sound. This phase was not a clumsy period of copying, but a gigantic learning workshop. While Western companies invested in rationalization and marketing, Chinese technicians learned how to harmonize sound, efficiency, and manufacturing costs. The result? Replicas turned into independent designs. Circuits were modified, components improved, power supplies made more stable. China began not just to build, but to become better. Corson and Deussen, the turning point. A name that must not be missing in this story is Corson, later Deussen, 2 names for the same company. They marked the moment the world realized China could do high-end. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, none other than Mark Levinson himself, the legendary high-end pioneer from the USA, commissioned the Chinese company Corson to manufacture a new amplifier series. The product was called Mark Levinson Red Rose, later known as Affirmation. The devices were positioned in the USA as high-end products with elegant design, hand-selected, tested, allegedly made in USA. But those who looked closely recognized that the devices were identical to the models that Corson sold under its own name directly from China, at a fraction of the price. This was a wake-up call. For the first time, it was shown that a Chinese manufacturer was not only capable of manufacturing at the highest level, but also that these devices were accepted in the West as high-end products, as long as no one knew where they truly came from. Corson, later Doosan, had thus proven that China could not only build high-end, but mastered it on an equal footing. From insider tip to pioneer, what began with Corson continued rapidly. New brands appeared: Sindak, Jungsun, Line Magnetic, Cayenne, Yikin, all inspired by Western models but with their own character. Especially in the field of tube technology, China developed into a real pioneer. Brands like Line Magnetic or Cayenne manufactured amplifiers that could easily compete with Western devices in Germany, often featuring classic design, point-to-point wiring, and a sound signature reminiscent of the best vintage equipment. And the price? 1/10 of what comparable European or American amps cost. The hi-fi scene was irritated and fascinated at the same time. The new generation of engineers with world-class standards. With the entry into the 21st century came the second generation of Chinese engineers. Many had studied abroad or worked at Philips, Texas Instruments, or Sony. They combined Western knowledge with Chinese efficiency, an explosive mix. This led to brands like SMSL, Topping, Fosi Audio, IEMA, Savage, or Gustard. These companies brought devices to the market that were often technically and metrologically better than many Western products, and at prices that were hard to believe. Chinese DACs achieved THD plus N values in the range of 0.001%. Amplifiers worked with the latest Class D modules, and the craftsmanship was at a level that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. China was no longer the copyist. China was the new innovation center, from copying to creating. The decisive difference from the early years. Today, China has developed its own sound philosophies. A Fosi Audio, or SMSL, no longer follows a copy strategy, but produces its own circuit designs, firmware, and acoustic ideas. Furthermore, Chinese manufacturers are experimenting with hybrid concepts, such as tube preamplifiers with Class D power stages or DSP-supported sound optimizations that hardly any Western manufacturer offers in this price range. And this is where the circle closes. What was once invented by Germany and perfected by Japan is now being democratized by China, made affordable for everyone without losing sound quality. The market has shifted. Today, in 2025, many of the most exciting hi-fi products come from China, from ultra-compact Bluetooth amps to full-size tube power amplifiers. The speed of innovation is breathtaking. While Europe and Japan consolidate their markets, discuss new regulations, and prices continue to rise, China brings new ideas, new circuits, new designs every week. The center of the hi-fi world has shifted to the east, permanently. Chapter conclusion. China did not conquer the hi-fi market overnight. It was a process, a generational shift that began with learning, continued with courage, and ended with self-confidence. And when one looks at brands like Fosi Audio, SMSL, Topping, or IEMA today, one recognizes that they embody what Germany once stood for: curiosity, technical enthusiasm, and the will to continuously perfect sound. Chapter 4. Personal concluding remarks. From pride to curiosity. When one consciously examines this entire development, from Germany's heyday to Japan's precision and China's incredible rise, a feeling remains that lies between admiration, melancholy, and perhaps a little pride. Let's not forget, without Germany, none of this would have happened. We laid the foundation. We defined what sound quality even means. Telefunken, Grundig, Saba, Dual, Braun, they all set standards that the entire world later oriented itself by. And perhaps that was exactly our problem. We rested on our successes while others learned how to make even more out of them. Japan showed us that precision and efficiency can create a new dimension of quality. And China ultimately proved to us that innovation is not a privilege of the West, but a question of curiosity, courage, and consequence. I believe this should not be viewed with arrogance, but with respect. Because what we see from China today, whether from Fosi Audio, SMSL, IEMA, or Topping, is the result of years of learning, endurance, and a deep technical understanding. Many of these devices today stand for something we used to call German craftsmanship: clean finishing, clever circuits, excellent measured values, and at prices that make it possible once again to experience music as a passion not a luxury good. And that is perhaps the most beautiful thought in this entire development. Sound is now accessible to everyone, no longer just to those who can afford high-end, but to everyone who loves music. Naturally, as someone who grew up with German hi-fi culture, I view the decline of our traditional brands with melancholy. When you look at the old Grundig receivers or Telefunken preamplifiers, that spirit still lingers, the pride in technology, design, and sound. But at the same time, I am happy that there are countries like Japan and China that carry this torch forward in their own way. Because ultimately, it's about music, emotion, and what you feel when you close your eyes and lose yourself in the sound. And if that happens today through a device from China, well, why not? It doesn't matter where it was built, but how it sounds. Perhaps, and this is my very personal thought, perhaps we in Europe need to learn to see sound the way the Japanese or Chinese see it. Not as a product, but as an art form. Then we would have a real chance for a comeback, and history would turn once again. And until then, enjoy the music, because that is what it has always been about in the end.